All right, perfect. Let's get started. So, welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Ragno. I am a clinical social worker, the associate clinical director at Mightier. And our presentation today is all about coping skills. I'm calling it the mechanics of coping skills. We're going to take a really specific approach in how we think about how coping skills work, when to use them, and why to use specific ones. We're going to really dive into some cognitive behavioral therapy here and use the CBT triangle, if you are familiar with that, as we think about coping skills. The reason I am being so specific in how I think about coping skills is I personally sometimes have some negative biases toward the idea of coping skills, because I think oftentimes we kind of water them down, we dull them down a little bit. And I think they can be really powerful if we think about them in the right way and use them in the right way and sort of understand how they can be impactful. So that's how we're going to look at things today. All right, let me take you through our agenda. So we're going to start with this phrase I hear all the time from my dear parents. Coping skills do not seem to work for my child. My child knows coping skills. They've practiced them. We talk about them. We print off the cards, and they don't work. They cannot access their coping skills in the moments they really need them. There is a lot of truth and legitimacy to that statement, to that experience. There are some reasons why that happens. So we're going to dive in there first. Then we're going to look at our cognitive behavioral therapy triangle, and we're going to pick out our coping access points. Our goal is to either change how we are feeling or change the intensity of how we are feeling. How do we do that? What are our access points to that? We are going to then we're going to get into the specific access points. First up is thought-based coping strategies, specifically identifying and restructuring negative thoughts. Then we're going to go at our physiology, right? What's happening inside our body when we have different emotional experiences. Think about heart rate, think about your breathing, think about muscle tension. And what are the physiology-based coping strategies we can use to change the intensity of our emotional experience and how regulated we are. So specifically, physical relaxation and breathing strategies are what we're going to look at. And then we're going to look at behavior-based coping strategies, specifically behavioral activation and opposite action. And then I'm going to leave you with some CBT coping steps that you can kind of go through in real life moments to make sure to apply these in a way that feels right. So, and before we go, as I go through all this, I'm also going to share the family and kid-friendly activities that we've made to introduce these concepts to kids. So everything I'm doing today is parent-facing, right? How can we understand these concepts? And then how can you help your child to understand these things? And we've put a lot of materials together, games, crafts, stories, that you can use to introduce these concepts to your child and help them practice. So I'm going to go through those as well as we get through each slide, and then also share out the resources at the end, because a lot of these are printables. If you are a Mightier family and your child is playing Mightier, you know that layers we have avatars. Your child can unlock costumes and dress their avatar in different ways. And for each skill pack, which the skill pack you see on the screen today is our coping badge, there's a little superhero costume that they can unlock with the code that is in this skill pack. So if your child hasn't already done that, you'll get access to that skill pack and that code at the end of this presentation. All right. So first, we're going to start with this experience. We know coping skills. We talk about them. We know when to use them. We can think about how they make sense, and then it doesn't matter. We get into the real life situations where my child is anxious, my child is frustrated, they're angry, someone said something to them on the playground, they got disappointed about something, and they have the reaction. They can't access their coping skills. It's like they can't even remember or pull from all the work we've done. And this happens all the time. And there's a very legitimate reason for why coping skills are actually really, really hard to access in the moments when we actually need them. And it has to do with like what happens in our brain and body when we are calm and regulated versus when we are upset and dysregulated. So think about how you feel when you're calm, like how your body and your brain feel when you're calm, right? And in these moments, like we might have everything's kind of working as it should, right? Working normally. We have emotional awareness. We can recognize how we feel. We can talk about what happened yesterday and that situation that made us upset yesterday. And you know what? Like, yeah, maybe I said something I shouldn't, right? Like we can think objectively, we can think rationally. We can understand our emotions a little better. We can make decisions. We can like problem solve, plan, be really more precise in our decision making, and we can have awareness of other people's emotions, right? So all of that happens when we're calm, when we're regulated. And then when we get really upset, right, like intensely upset, and we move into this like dysregulated state, we're actually moving into fight or flight a little bit here, right? This especially happens when we're like really angry, we're really anxious, we're really overwhelmed, and we feel our body and brain's interpretation is like we're in danger, we're under some sort of threat, right? And it doesn't necessarily matter if that threat is real. It could be it could be a perceived threat. It could be a threat to our ego, like a threat to our beliefs, things we care a lot about. Like even that can move us into that state a little bit. Another piece here is the more we move into that state, the easier it is to get into that state. There's a muscle memory element to this. And when we are in that fight or flight mode, like this is an automatic instinctual response happening within our body, right? So there are things our brain and body need to do, like for survival, technically, right? So there are physiological changes. Our heart rate increases, your muscles get tense, you have that adrenaline rush, right? Think of how you feel when you're angry or when you're really anxious, or when you're scared of, of something. This is our body's preparation mode, right? It's prepping us for movement. It's prepping us for reaction. We have impaired cognitive functions. So think about like whatever your impulse control was or wasn't, like in a calm moment, or think about like working memory, that ability to sort of like be in the moment and recall past information, right? Like, oh, when this happened last time, I reacted in this way and that wasn't good. It led to this consequence. I should maybe act differently. I should pull out a coping skill. Or cognitive flexibility. How could I think differently about this? How can I problem solve? How can I come up with a different way of reacting here? All of those cognitive functions would actually slow us down in these moments of like, if it was a true threat. And so our brain gives us limited access to those. We can't actually truly think as clearly in the moments when we're really anxious, really angry, right? If you think about that from like a situation in your own life, and it's almost just like your brain gets stuck or you're not able to problem solve in the way you normally would be, or like come up with the response that you know would be like the right way to respond to a situation, right? It's like we have limited access there. This is the main reason why recalling coping skills is really hard in the moments we need them, because our brain can't get there necessarily. And so we have the behavioral reaction, right? We have the verbal reaction, we have the physical reaction. So part of why coping skills are so hard to access when we need them, even if we know them in theory, is because of what happens when we are emotionally dysregulated. The other part is it has to do with how we are teaching coping skills and how we teach emotional regulation. And so on the right side of the screen, you see like this image of a girl sitting in a chair looking at a bike. Oftentimes in typical therapeutic settings, we talk about emotional regulation and we talk about coping skills as if they are like theoretical concepts. If we were teaching a child to ride a bike, we would not look at a bike and talk about a bike and think about a bike and then expect the child could ride a bike, right? Like the child has to get on the bike. Their body and their brain have to practice. They have to build muscle memory. They have to develop that sense of balance, those reaction times, right? Like we know that for riding a bike, and the same concept applies for emotional regulation. And kids will do it. Like kids will build that skill. It's just so much about practice. And if you're a Mightier family, this is what your child is actually doing as they are playing Mightier. This is the skill that they are building, right? They're practicing emotional regulation in those low intensity moments over and over and over again. So they're actually building muscle memory around that skill. And what happens when they have truly internalized that emotional regulation ability is now jump back to the other side of the screen. When they experience those emotions, like the anger, the anxiety, they will not necessarily get to that point of dysregulation where they can't think clearly anymore, right? Or that everything is sort of out of their control, right? Both things can be true now. They can recall coping skills, access those coping skills, utilize those coping skills, still feel the emotion that they are legitimately feeling, but be in better control at the same time. So this is kind of like the full picture of like emotional regulation is so important in this full picture. We are going to talk about coping skills. And as we talk about coping skills, we are going to think about them in terms of when and how to use them, but also the fact that they need practice too. They are something that we need to be practicing and training ourselves on how to get stronger at and build that muscle memory around. So we're going to start by looking at the cognitive behavioral therapy triangle. If you are not familiar with this, in cognitive behavioral therapy, it is really centered on the idea that our thoughts, our emotions, and our behaviors and our physiological response, all of those things are connected. And they all impact one another. I've put emotions in the middle of this triangle today just to highlight the fact that we don't have direct access to changing our emotions. Like if you're feeling angry, you can't just say, don't feel angry anymore and then not feel angry, right? You can't just say, feel happy now and be happy. For anxiety, you can't just say like, don't feel anxious about this, feel calm. Like that doesn't work. We can't just like flip a switch and change our emotions. We have to go at it through our thoughts, through our behaviors, and through our physiological response. And we do have direct access to those things, right? You can change the way you think about something. You can get yourself to go up and do a specific behavior. You can take deep breaths that are going to lower your heart rate, right? You can go at it through those access points. And that's what we're going to do today with our coping skills. All right. We're going to carry that triangle through each of the slides as well. Now, as adults, like we can get that concept like, oh, okay, right, I have to think differently, do something different to change how I feel or the intensity of how I feel. That's harder for kids. Like it's a higher level concept. So the way that we are introducing this to kids is through almost like this idea of choosing your own path, or that there are multiple paths in any story. And we're communicating coping as a superpower in a way. So what you see on the left here, and I'll send this out, is it's a little story about a boy whose hamster is all of a sudden missing. And there are lots of ways this story can play out. This boy might feel different emotions immediately. He might have a reaction to those emotions, or he might have certain different coping. He might take different coping actions, change how he feels, and then end up with a different outcome. So for example, Hammy's gone missing. Alex felt angry. Alex yelled and kicked, like the end. Or he felt angry and then he did progressive muscle relaxation. He tightened and relaxed his fists. He felt calmer. He was able to figure out that actually Hammy's cage was just getting cleaned. Like silly story, but there are lots of variations. And the point here is for your child to go through this and see how many paths they can find as they navigate their way, just to communicate to them like, oh, right, like there are lots of ways this could play out. There are lots of ways that I can react. And actually choosing to do a coping skill and change how I feel, or the intensity of how I feel, can change my outcomes. So that's the point there. On the right side, we have a loveling story. If you're a Mightier family, you know our lovelings. This is Lexi. Lexi is awesome. Lexi feels things really intensely, and Lexi can get really stuck in feeling certain emotions, right? And so Lexi has to challenge herself to use her coping skills to help her see something in a different way, pull herself out of whatever emotion she's feeling sort of stuck in. The activity here is to like write your own comic, write your own story, draw, be creative, whatever it might be, but like come up with a situation in which Lexi is feeling angry, and then help her use a coping skill and help her get to like a different outcome. So that's just sort of like to get this across to kids. All right. Now we're going to get at like the specific points on the triangle, the specific coping skills. So first, we're going to start with thoughts. Specifically identifying negative thoughts. So think of like what happens in your head, what happens in your brain when you feel really anxious about something, or really stressed, or really sad. Think about like the specific thoughts you have, or the patterns in your brain, like being stuck, feeling like your thoughts are spiraling, feeling like you're perseverating on something, right? Like we can see how our emotional state impacts how our brain works and how we're thinking. So the skills we're going to talk about here, you would use these when you're feeling an intense emotion, and you're noticing that your thoughts seem out of your control or different from usual. You feel like you can't move forward mentally to problem solve, or you're feeling really stuck. And the specific skill here, which is what you see in like the yellow box, it could be recognizing thinking patterns. I'm noticing that I'm being really pessimistic. I'm noticing that I'm perseverating. I can't stop thinking about this thing that I'm angry about. It might be recognizing a thought as unhelpful. I keep having this thought and it's not going to help me meet my goals. It's not going to help me like achieve whatever I'm trying to achieve. Or naming the cognitive distortion. We're going to get to what cognitive distortions are on the next slide. But those are like the specific types of thoughts where like, catastrophizing, I'm mind reading, like I assume that person is thinking negatively about me, right? Or like, they definitely don't want me here. That's an example of mind reading because I have no idea what that person actually is thinking in their head. And why do these things work? Because what we're talking about here is actually just identifying negative thoughts. We're not talking about changing them. That'll be on the next, the next point. But these work because they create some separation from you and your thoughts, and they allow you to think more objectively about your thoughts. So really powerful moment in sort of like taking that pause and separating. Again, I will say this and the next one are going to be probably the hardest ones for kids. Really great for adults, hard for kids, but like I think still a great concept to introduce your child to. The way that we are introducing kids to this, our weeds, or we're kind of renaming it to a garden of thoughts, activity series gets at this idea and sort of introduces kids to like, there are thoughts in your head. Sometimes they don't always help you. Sometimes you can't always trust them. We introduce kids to cognitive distortions, and then we practice some reframing and restructuring exercises, which we'll get to that in a second. But first, the first step is we have to like show kids that comparison between helpful and unhelpful thoughts, positive and negative thoughts. And so there are a bunch of just examples, and, having your child identify which ones are sort of like the weedy thoughts is what we're calling them, right? Because they're like getting in the way theoretically of your garden growing. And then the identify the weed sheet here has to do with cognitive distortions. So if you've never heard of cognitive distortions before, like they are really, I feel like just even reading the list of common cognitive distortions is really helpful, really powerful, because these are common things that we can all do from time to time. For example, mind reading, like I mentioned, is when you sort of like have a thought, but it's really like you're assuming you know what someone else is thinking. Oftentimes this comes up like that person they were talking about me. They don't want me here. They think I'm weird, like stuff like that, right? That's mind reading. We have no idea what other people are thinking. But we assume we do. We believe our thoughts. Negative filter is another really common one. I got an A on the test, but all I see are the mistakes I made. I didn't see like any of like the great comments or anything like that. Or I messed up in this game, and it's the only thing I can focus on is like that mistake rather than all the positive moments, right? You give more weight to the negative than to the positive, and your brain kind of skews things in that way. These are examples of cognitive distortions. Again, super common. For kids, we've just turned them into weeds, which means just naming them as weeds and giving them a little bit of design and creativity. So let kids play with those a little bit more. And then there are some like chances for kids to sort of identify the type of weed happening in a certain situation, just to sort of like bring that to their attention and let them play with it a little bit. Okay, so next we're going to go to cognitive restructuring. Again, so we're still on like the thought point of the triangle. So we've identified whatever thoughts are happening or how our brain is working, and now we're going to try to change that or alter the way we're thinking. So you would use this when you recognize a thought as unhelpful or negative. You're recognizing that you're having like an automatic negative thought or some biases or assumptions, the cognitive distortions, or you feel like your thoughts are stuck. You feel like they're spiraling. You feel like they're perseverative. Like you feel like you don't have control over them necessarily. There are a few options here for what you can do. You can reframe your thoughts. So this idea of turning like, I know whatever happened into, I'm worried that this happened, right? I know that person was talking about me. No, I'm worried they were talking about me, right? Reframe it. Challenge, okay? Another possibility in this situation is that, force yourself to come up with another possibility. Question, do I have any evidence that this is true, right? Like force yourself to write that evidence down. If you are not 100% sure that that thought is true, that thought might not be true, right? So that's like a really powerful way to sort of like, especially with kids, show to kids that like, wow, this thing I believe is so true might actually not be true. And here's how I can like prove that to myself. And then change. This one has more to do with like the perseverative, stuck, spiraling thoughts. Sometimes it is just really hard to get out of that thinking pattern. And so you kind of have to force your brain into another space. So this is where distraction can be really powerful. Engaging in mindfulness activities can be really powerful, like just moving your brain into a different cognitive space and giving some time before coming back to anything that you're thinking about. And then why? So again, this creates some separation between your thought and your feeling, forces objective thinking and considering other perspectives, and it can calm those spiraling or racing thoughts. The way that we're going to do this with kids, so we're calling these cognitive restructuring strategies de-weeding tools. They're like garden tools. So fact checking is a really powerful one for kids. Do I have any evidence this is true? What is the evidence? Possibility play. What are other options? What are other possibilities here? Find the feeling is another one I really like a lot. Oftentimes we confuse our thoughts with our feelings. And so being able to like get at, no, I think this happened. No, I'm worried that this happened. I'm worried right now. That's really powerful to get to like, whoa, no, okay, this is actually just how I'm feeling. And now I can make that connection that my worry about this or my anger for this is actually impacting my thoughts right now. And then another thing we do in cognitive behavioral therapy is we do a lot of like thought tracking. Boring for kids in a lot of ways. Like, here's a situation that's happened. Here's how I felt about it. Here's the automatic thought I had. This is the cognitive distortion I used. Here's how I can reframe and restructure that. We would do that in therapeutically. Here, this sheet, this garden log is like a lighter way to do that with your child. Take it or leave it. It is a little bit of a better fit for therapeutic settings. But if you feel like, no, my child can do this, my child will get this, they can walk through these steps, definitely try it out with them and do this for yourself. Like show a big piece of this for everything that we do with Mightier and all of our resources, modeling your own emotional openness and acceptance and awareness, like that is really important. So especially for this one, this could be really powerful for you to walk through the steps so your child can see even how you change your thoughts and how you can kind of fall into these traps at times. All right, so that's it for the thought-based stuff. Next, we're going to go to physiology, right? Like what's happening inside our body in reaction to and response to our emotions. So we're going to look specifically at physical relaxation and deep breathing. Usually I would actually separate these out, but oftentimes they're so paired together anyways that I'm just going to put them on the same slide. So when do you use like a physiology-based coping strategy or relaxation strategy? It would be when you notice that, think back to like the anger or the anxiety and how your body feels in those moments. So you might notice tension in your body and in your muscles, right? You might notice your fists are clenched, your shoulders are kind of tight, and you feel that in your neck. You might feel disconnected from your body and from your environment. This happens a lot with anxiety. That tingly feeling or like floaty feeling you can get. You might feel your temperature rise. You feel the heat like in your cheeks and your neck. And then for sure, heart racing, your breathing is shallow. Like that's going to be a pretty quick automatic response to a number of our intense emotions. Now, what do you do about it? So your choice here is really going to depend on which of these sensations you are feeling, because you're going to want to kind of go for the opposite. You're going to kind of want to like flip the sensation, do something that changes that sensation, and it kind of helps you calm and regulate. So for tension in your muscles, like progressive muscle relaxation is really, really powerful, right? I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide, but it is that series of like going through different like parts of your body and tensing and releasing. And then you're forcing relaxation to happen within your muscles as you do that. Pressure, kind of along the same lines. And this might be a massage. This might be like you squeezing your own arms, right? Like that deep pressure is really powerful. Grounding. So especially with that like disconnected kind of floaty sensation, physically putting your body against something solid, right? So back against the wall or sitting on the ground, palms on the desk, like really connecting yourself is very powerful, and kind of like, and probably pairing deep breathing with this as well. Deep breathing is for sure on the list, right? Very powerful way. Like, and I think everyone like knows what deep breathing is. We're talking about like deep belly breathing, right? Not in your chest, all the way to your belly, slow. Really powerful for slowing your heart rate down. And then temperature changes is the other one, right? So you could do this in a few different ways. When you notice like that you're feeling heated, like you're feeling, you might get flushed. And that might be ice in your hands, on your wrists, on your neck, water on your face, cold shower, things like that, right? Actually very important, very powerful, and just sort of like changing what's happening internally, which then like can in turn lower the intensity of how we're feeling emotionally. So in general, all these things kind of calm the physiological reaction we're experiencing, especially during fight or flight, slow our breathing and heart rate down, and like ease us out, ease our muscles, relax us in general. So let's see, let's go to the next one. Here's just, this is how we show kids progressive muscle relaxation within the Mightier app. The activity pack I'm going to send you has like these images in a series, like you could, like they're bookmarks. But you can see here just how we're showing deep breathing and progressive muscle relaxation in kind of some goofy ways. All right. I see a question coming in. I'm going to hold questions till the end. Okay. Oops. Let me see. Go back. Okay. Next. Oh, how did I get here? I'm sorry. Okay. Here we go. All right. Now we're going to look at the behavior-based coping. So specifically behavioral activation or opposite action. Those are different things. You would use them in different situations, but we're going to just talk about both here. So behavioral activation is actually something you could use specifically when you're feeling very low energy, sadness, you're feeling very stuck. You notice that you were isolating from people, or you're like feeling stuck in like an unfulfilling routine. what behavioral activation is, it is like engaging in positive, enjoyable, or like energy enhancing activities. So if you think about the feeling of sadness, right, and where we're most likely laying around on the couch, we're not talking to people, we're not engaging with others, we're very low energy, that act of getting up, and it's hard, forcing yourself to get up, go do something physical, can actually boost your mood, right? And it takes practice, and it is hard to get yourself to do as well, because you don't necessarily have motivation to do that. Pro-social behavior is another one, meaning doing good for other people, that feeling of like, okay, wow, like I feel better because I'm helping other people, or connecting with other people, being social. Oftentimes when we are sad, we don't want to connect with other people. And so getting yourself to do that can actually give you that boost as well, and kind of pull you out of that feeling. Opposite action can be applied in, so everything we just talked about was sort of like, I'm feeling sad, I need to be boosted. Opposite action can be used a little differently as well, with like, whatever my behavioral urge is right now, doing the opposite of it. So the example I have is like, for anger, if, you know, even if my behavior is like, I'm speaking loudly, I'm speaking intensely, like I'm yelling, and I take the opposite action of slowing down, speaking more softly, that can be calming in a way as well, right? So it's just this idea of like doing the opposite of whatever you are doing, or your urge is to do behaviorally. So these work on like different things, but behavioral activation boosts mood and energy, leads to feelings of joy and fulfillment and value. And then opposite action, if used in more of like a down regulation, can be like, it forces a pause. It lets our rational brain catch up to us as well. Because we often we react more quickly than we think about things oftentimes. I don't have a visual for either of these, because these are actually not activities we've built into Mightier yet. So coming soon, but they are strategies that are worth thinking about and worth using. And then sensory. So I had definitely planned to talk about sensory regulation and sensory strategies, sensory dysregulation and sensory regulation strategies. And it needs its own webinar, because it just would not be fair to try to pack it into this one. I don't think we would do it justice. So that is going to be separated out. We will do our same notification of letting everyone know when our next webinar is. And so we're going to separate sensory out, because I just didn't feel right about trying to cram it in here. So what I'm going to leave you with, the CBT coping steps, I'm calling them. So this is for in the moment. It's also for practice. So always think back to this triangle and your access points, and your emotion kind of being at the center, and then CBT coping steps. So what you're going to do is take note of the thoughts and behaviors. Take note of your thoughts, take note of your behaviors, take notes of what's happening within your body. Choose your access points. Honestly, whatever feels most accessible, most reasonable. Thoughts are often the hardest to start with, because of what we talked about at the beginning, where when we feel intense emotions and when we feel dysregulated, we can't think as clearly. Our brain isn't letting us do that. So thoughts are sometimes not the first place to start, especially with kids, even though it is still very powerful and worth knowing and understanding and talking about and practicing. So choose an access point, and then you're going to kind of work your way around the triangle. And I'm going to use opposite action here again, because I think it applies to kind of how we're talking about all these things, where you notice a certain thought, you notice a certain response, you notice a certain behavior, and sort of doing your coping skill is the opposite in a way. So you can work your way around the triangle, trying different things, or do a few strategies that fall within at one point of the triangle. Overall goal being that you are decreasing the intensity of the emotion you're feeling. You are improving your state of regulation, and therefore you're going to feel more in control, have more choice in these, in whatever you're experiencing and however you want to handle it, right? So you're just like working your way back to regulation. And then again, practicing these, like these are all coping skills are for in the moment, but they need to be practiced outside of the moment because we need to train our brain and body to get really good at them. Like we need to be able to call on them more automatically. We need to build some muscle memory around these things. Otherwise, they're going to continue to be kind of inaccessible to us in the moments we really need them. So that's just a plug for practice. And that's it. I'm going to stop the recording in a second and I will look at the questions. I really thank you for joining. If you have any comments, you have any like questions that are a little more personal about your child, you are welcome to email me. Happy to talk here also about like ideas, requests for future workshop, webinar topics, because we do want to keep this series going on a regular basis. So, and then in the next couple days, I'm going to send out an email that will have this recording as well as all of the resources that I shared attached so that you can do these things with your kids. All right. Thank you all so much. I'm going to stop the recording, but I will hang on and answer questions.